This is an intro to an intro. I'm going to explain my terms. I'm trying to get to my main point in life, which is the difference between science and philosophy. And I do want to make very specific point, like scientists think they're doing philosophy, and that people have got this whole thing confused. So my definitions are physicalism, what Sean Carroll is doing, the idea that all things can be reduced to physical rules, laws, and behaviors. So what physicalist people believe, what I call scientism, is the idea that things like free will, personal identity, self, life, and consciousness and thoughts can all be reduced to physicalism as on one side, that is science, the mind-body problems on the other, that's philosophy. So I do want to talk about these philosophers really quickly who bring something to the table that apparently Sean Carroll isn't paying attention to, or I explain what the options are for what he's doing, why he's so rooted in physicalism and doesn't explain himself, because that's what he does. So David Chalmers, Thomas Nagel, this is what I do with Heidegger. At least he's on the right side, but I don't always think they're making the deepest points they can make and prioritizing those points. So Chalmers and Nagel really want to make this same case that there is a mind-body problem. They want to say, can you reduce, in this case, consciousness to physical processes? And so scientists just jump to this idea that there is no mind-body problem, there is only body, basically. So the brain is the mind. And here's the question I want to pose to you, and then I'll stop with the intro. When you think about your thinking, when you think about what you're doing all of the time, which is doing things in your head, right? Whether it's remembering things, whether it's doing something in the present, or whether it's seeing the future. And all of the panoply of things your mind does, including dreaming. When you think about that, does that seem weird to you? Because this seems super weird to me. It seems weird to me when we look at the world scientifically, which we all do, and we see how scientific things work. And then we think about what consciousness is and how we experience it, which just seems to be what Chalmers and Nagel's point is, that we experience it subjectively. But we also can't explain the experience. But the point is that the experience we have of consciousness is unknown, is a mystery, is a part of philosophy and not science. But what I want to say as a thought experiment is think about your brain screen. Think about the phenology of consciousness. What is consciousness? Not what is it doing? Not what do you think about what it's doing? What is the actual thing? So when I think about a dog in the past, okay, I get a picture of a dog. That's what happens. That picture is a thing, and it is not the dog, okay? It's not the dog from the past. It is a picture in my brain that is a new dog that has all the qualities of the old dog that I remember. But they're things, the thoughts themselves, the interactions of those thoughts with memory, how those thoughts translate into language, and then even how they translate into belief. So you can do all that stuff, but what makes it strange is, what is it? Just ask yourself honestly, what are thoughts? What are memories as they appear as thoughts? But the point is that this act of consciousness is so unusual, but it is also so different than how we would expect to see the world in terms of super simple scientific questions and answers. It is something we just don't understand, and that's why we can't argue about free will. When we try to argue about free will, both sides get completely lost. Why? Because we're taking a scientific perspective into it with scientific expectations. So I want to set these up for you. Physicalism is everything is reduced to physical stuff. It is that all things are reducible to atoms, basically, and that's ultimately what Sean Carroll is going to say. The philosophers like Nagel and Chalmers totally get the mind-body problem. And if you look it up, you'll see we haven't solved the mind-body problem. An argument can be made, we haven't solved it at all because they can't be solved. And that's part of what Chalmers and Thomas Nagel are talking about, is that we may not have that apparatus to solve it. I think this is where Heidegger was. I really do. I really think when Heidegger gave up, he said, I'm the apparatus looking at the apparatus. I think actually he did say that. So I don't think I'm being that much of a genius here. So that's the intro. Let's move on to the first intro and then the actual discussion. So for you scientizers, I do want to do an intro for the video that's coming up. This is going to be a very specific video about Sean Carroll's premise that we don't survive death because we're only atoms. And I'm making a point that pops up over and over again. The point is, when Sean Carroll makes wild claims in philosophy using only science, like consciousness, self, free will is only atoms, can just lump these all together under the mind-body problem. So for this particular debate about surviving death, the mind-body problem is where the dualism is apparent to us as philosophers and apparently not to scientists. Mind-body problem means mind and body are different. It means all those things you group under body, including the brain, to use the scientific method and expect to find rules and then behavior from that material, like survivability. But mind is very different. Mind is the thing that we know less about that's still in philosophy. That's why we have philosophy of mind. We don't have philosophy of body. We probably do somewhere. Philosophy of mind is about understanding those elements of mind that we don't get in the physical world, like consciousness, like memory, like thoughts, like relations between these things, the final steps of our actual perception and what that means for consciousness. So when we look at consciousness as a philosopher, we take into account the noumenal, the phenomenal. We take into account the mind-body dichotomy. We have the mind, we have the body, and the mind is what we would call real consciousness, and the body is what we would call brain. Neuroscientists look at brain, they do look at these atoms, they do look at activity in the brain. And so to ignore the whole issue is maybe something a scientist can afford to do, but if he's playing philosopher, he's got to tackle the problem. And that's why in the coming video with Sean Carroll, the fact that he doesn't even at one point say, oh, but there is another alternative. There is the whole history of philosophy, which, by the way, invented science, invented physics, invented all the stuff that he's doing, set the stage for it, gave it the ability and the clarity to move forward. So he doesn't even take 1 second to say there is a mind-body problem. He launches into a scientific explanation with no room for anything else. And so even though I like him and even though I appreciate what he's doing in science, he is archetypally the example of what I'm talking about when I say people mix science and philosophy. Let's get into it. Science versus philosophy. I don't know why it's ended up like this. I don't know why this is all we talk about, but I really do think they're fundamental. My argument in common sense philosophy has been that philosophy's gone. There is no philosophy. For 300 years since David Hume destroyed the potential for philosophy and Reid was forgotten, the person that argued with him about that particular issue. Reid was famous for saying, if you keep going this direction, philosophy is going to be seen as ridiculous and no one's going to want to do it, except maybe academic philosophers. And that's what happened. That's what this channel's about. It's about people forgetting what philosophy even was. So when we say, is philosophy gone? They don't know what it is, so they can't tell you whether it's gone or not. But what I found recently is even better examples of this issue. So I want to give you an example. The physicist named Sean Carroll. He's a very good scientist. He's very common sense in the respect that he's able to reduce complex ideas to simple explanations. What he does a lot, though, is philosophy. And then what I mean by that is he asks philosophy questions and it comes out science. Here's a philosophy question. I'm going to give you the attempt at a philosophy answer. And then I just throw up a bunch of science. So that's what seems to keep happening. I've been saying these people won't shut up about philosophy and they have no idea what it is. Let's get into this example. Sean Carroll, in this particular case, on Do We Survive Death? So this comes from a 2015, I think, Freedom from Religious Foundation award ceremony. The award was given to Sean Carroll as a physicist, public figure, / I'm kind of a philosopher. And he does know stuff about philosophy, but what I'm going to demonstrate, hopefully today, is that apparently he's never read any of it. I don't know. Carroll's conclusion is really simple, and it is that we don't survive death at all. So we are born, we live, we die, and we're completely gone, which is a very scientific argument. But just like Thomas Reid in the 18th century arguing with the clown David Hume, my reaction from everything I've learned is against this scientism. What is scientism? When scientists do philosophy. I'm going to try to tell you why, because I'm going to tell you Sean Carroll's position. His argument is that if you look at science, nothing else, just hard science, what you learn is that there is no way that atoms can survive after death. Life is just movement and activity. It's just so concrete and scientific. It's wearing me out. And he's right. Like, a lot of this is right. It's right on this other level, way below philosophy. So I know I'm getting sidetracked here, but I know philosophy came first and it gave birth to all these sciences. And then somehow the scientists think philosophy didn't do that and that they're the good guys. And philosophy is sophistry. I really think that's what they believe. And I'm trying to tell you his conclusion at 100%, not 96%, that we don't survive death. His evidence is that atoms cannot survive after they stop moving, after the life is gone. It seems like he's given no thought to what life is. But let's just say life is the activity of atoms, which is what he's saying. When those atoms can no longer move, which is what we call scientific physical death, then there's no possible way to make an argument like religious people do that those atoms keep going. Here's the problem, and it's a simple one. Why do we think we're just atoms? No, but even before that, epistemologically, why do we think we have the ability to know what life is? But given the method of philosophy, the struggle with paradox, we launch into what is life, knowing it's going to be a tough one, knowing, like Russell says, that we're going to be full of doubt, and we think about what life is. Sean Carroll launches in this award ceremony speech that he took seriously, that he outlined seriously. He's not saying maybe we survive death, maybe we don't. He's saying absolutely you don't. I can show you atoms don't survive. Atoms in any physical laws we're not aware of cannot make those atoms survive. I believe all that. That makes perfect sense as a scientist. All of us are scientists in a sense. My scientific side is telling me absolutely 100%. And he's right. It's not just my opinion that he's right. He is, in fact, right. The problem is we're not just atoms. I don't know what we are. I don't know what to tell you. Atoms are almost a byproduct. Atoms are almost this surface material of whatever's going on. When you say life is just atoms, to me, you've given no thought to what life is. Zero. But that's because I'm a philosopher. So let's think about what Sean Carroll is doing here. This is pretty simple, summarizing his arguments. His argument was a little more complex. He added more stuff. He talked about other things, and I'll get back to that. But in this particular section, we're dealing with this overall conclusion. We don't survive death. Like most atheists, I think he would call himself an atheist. He makes the argument that wishful thinking is what gets us into that problem. I agree. I agree with almost everything he says. It's only his absolute basic premise that we know enough to say life is atoms. So there's only a couple things that could be going on with Sean Carroll here. He really thinks that life, and I think he understands this, life is bound up with consciousness, with thinking. And he says, quote, the brain is the mind. And what he means by that is when we talk about what is the mind, what is consciousness, what are thoughts, they all come from an atomistic premise, from a foundation of atomistic hard science, neurobiology. That's where it comes from. No philosopher believes that I'm aware of. No philosophers ever believe that, and it is misleading. So let's go back to the possible explanation for why Carroll would say the brain is the mind. Ignore the mind-body problem completely. Say that there's no chance we survive death, and then try to say life, and by extension consciousness, is just atoms. That's it. No room for anything else. And I know I'm sounding mystical because I can't help it. Again, I was Sean Carroll, and I'm not finding religion. I don't know how many times I got to say that. It's confusing to me that someone who's acting philosophical can't read 5 minutes of philosophy. And maybe philosophy is that bad. Maybe it's so horrible. He went and read Deleuze or Whitehead, read about 2 pages and went, okay, I'm done. Because I did too. So I don't know what to tell you where to get your philosophy from to make it more philosophical. But here are the explanations. 1, he really believes that consciousness is only comprised of atoms. And I'm not saying I know what else it's comprised of. Again, philosophy is battling the paradox, right? So I'm going in and I'm saying, this is my experience with consciousness. As a common sense thinker, this is everyone's experience with consciousness. I'm trying to find an objective definition. If you're not doing objectivity, you're wasting our time. I'm trying to understand consciousness. I'm trying to do some of the things Heidegger was doing, looking at what the thing is. He was looking at ontology and being, but by extension, consciousness. Does Sean Carroll really believe that the complete picture of consciousness can be explained by merely atoms and their behavior and their metaphysics? I don't know. That's number 1. Number 2, does he care about consciousness? Is he saying consciousness is secondary? Consciousness is nothing. Consciousness is ephemeral, mystical. Because that is an argument. An argument is that consciousness is a byproduct. It is some irrelevant, unimportant byproduct of hard science. Does he not care? Number 3, is this epistemology so scientific, which is a contradiction. Epistemology is philosophy and the scientific method is science. But let's just say he's mixing philosophy and science, because clearly he is. And he says, my theories about how you know only include facts. Anything outside of that, I won't talk about. And in a sense, that is science. If you're only doing science and you know the boundaries, I think you can say, I need the facts. I think that's a fair thing to say. So where are we with this question? We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what life is, and by extension, consciousness. We don't have any idea. We need philosophy to clear up the language and then give us the direction with that question. Does Sean Carroll believe that things that aren't facts, that aren't scientific facts, are unimportant, irrelevant, inconsequential, don't help us? That's number 3. And I don't know what that means, but that could bring us back to my other point that he might dismiss philosophy altogether. So 1, does he really believe consciousness is just atoms and that's enough for him? 2, does he care? 3, does he build a way of knowing where science is the only thing that gives him any information at all? Which means in terms of ways of knowing, we know that science is a way of knowing, art is a way of knowing, metaphor, philosophy is a way of knowing, and sometimes religion is a way of knowing. My whole point today was we've blurred this distinction between science and philosophy. We don't seem to care. Philosophy has embarrassed itself clearly. And so the point of my channel is to come back and say, I get you hate me. I get you're jealous of my looks. I understand all of this. But if you can ad hominem me, we can talk about critical common sense. Common sense is a shared way of knowing. It got dismissed. Philosophy got embarrassed. Now we have a hard scientist doing philosophy up on a stage convincing people. And I think that's a problem. I think that's good for diminishing the effects of religion, but I think it's bad for overall creating a world of people who are able to think. So that's this section. That is the Sean Carroll, Do We Survive Death analysis. I hope that helps you. We'll move on to the next section.
So I do want to summarize this video. I want to explain that what we're doing is trying to show the difference between science and philosophy. I'm trying to highlight that by specifically looking at Sean Carroll's argument that everything we are is atoms, and so that if you want to prove that you go on after death, you have to prove that in some possible physical way those atoms survive. And he spends all his time doing that. And the truth is, that's not the question. The question is, are we just atoms? It's a much better question, and it's rooted in the philosophical mind-body problem that we're still dealing with and we should be talking about. But we get distracted by the scientism. In this particular case, all of the discussion about whether atoms can survive after you die. They probably don't. No one thinks they do. No one's serious. Like, I agree with Sean Carroll 100%. They don't survive. If you're talking about the hard problem of consciousness, which is reconciling subjective experience with a scientific perspective, but what it means is the hard problem of consciousness can't even be brought up if we can't clear up this debate between philosophy and science. And a discussion like free will is super related. So I'm trying to say that Carroll spends all his time, because he's a scientist, on the wrong issue, a scientific issue related to atoms. That's not really even the question. And he should have gone back and said there's a mind-body problem. The atoms can't survive. Is there something else that can survive? Let's talk about that.